He was 10 years old, but in his mind he was only 5. He was a special kid in our world, looking for just a bit of love and care, something to ease his disability and the way he saw things differently. But before he could really experience the world's kindness, tragically, his own parents ended his life in a way so shocking, it's hard to even picture. His own mother and stepfather tortured him naked on freezing days in the snow, beating him so severely that his sensitive body parts were damaged. Some truths are painful but still need to be heard. This video is about Bobby Äikiä. He came into this world on March 12, 1995, but his life was tragically taken away on January 14, 2006, outside Näsjö, Jönköping County, Sweden. Bobby was just a 10-year-old Swedish boy, and he had Fragile X syndrome. Today we're going to dive into the challenges he faced during his short life and the heartbreaking reality of how his own parents brought about his untimely end. Imagine being just 19 and welcoming a child into the world. That's how Bobby Äikiä's story begins with his mom, Nina. Now here's where things start to twist. Nina didn't really see herself as a traditional mom. To her, Bobby was more like a younger brother, an unexpected responsibility. To help out, Bobby got a support family, which he visited every week. Sounds like a good thing, right? But things were about to take a turn. Enters Eddie Larsson, Nina's new boyfriend. He's got a past, a former inmate with a history of serious crime like rape. Eddie paints this dreamy picture for Nina, a quiet life in the countryside, a charming little farm with animals. It's like a fairy tale. So Nina, swept up in the promise, packs up and moves away with Eddie, leaving behind Bobby's support network. But guess what? The reality is far from the dream. They end up in this old, run-down place. It's more of a shack than a croft. No animals, no toilet, barely any electricity, and the only warmth comes from car heaters and an old stove. In the fall of 2005, Bobby's world took a dramatic shift. His mother, Nina, after marrying Eddie Larsson, decided to bring Bobby to live with them on a small, remote farm. This decision marked the beginning of a harrowing period in Bobby's young life. A time filled with pain and mistreatment at the hands of those who should have been his protectors. Bobby, a 10-year-old boy, navigated life with the intellectual capacity of a 5-year-old due to his Fragile X syndrome. Despite his challenges, he was making strides at a special school for disabled children. It was here, in this nurturing environment, that Bobby began to blossom. He learned to write his name and proudly count to 5. The school became a haven for him, a place where he found joy in his new classmates and the thrill of learning. He started to open up, showing signs of happiness and social growth, small victories that meant the world in his journey. But this period of progress and positivity was abruptly interrupted. Bobby's consistent attendance at school began to falter. His parents, Nina and Eddie, started reporting him sick, calling him off school with increasing frequency. These absences weren't just a break in routine, they were red flags, signaling something deeply troubling in Bobby's home life. The safe, encouraging space of his school was being replaced by a hidden reality at home, a stark contrast to the nurturing and care he was receiving at school. This change raised alarm bells. The once visible steps forward in Bobby's social and educational development were being overshadowed by the mysterious and frequent absences. It was a concerning pattern, hinting at the disturbing reality of what Bobby was facing away from the watchful and caring eyes of his teachers and classmates. Bobby's last day in school, the 15th of December, 2005, seemed like any other day. There was nothing to hint that he wouldn't be back after a short break. The following day, his mom rang up the school. She said he was down with a cold and a fever, nothing serious, just something that needed a few days at home. With the Christmas holidays around the corner, everyone expected Bobby to return in the new year, ready to jump back into school life. But when the holidays ended and the school gates opened again on January 10th, Bobby's seat remained noticeably empty. Days passed, and he still wasn't there. His friends might have wondered where he was. His teachers probably grew concerned. The lively boy who loved to learn and play was suddenly just gone. At home, things were taking a dark turn. Nina and her husband Eddie, they weren't the caring figures they should have been. After a few drinks, they became someone else entirely, and Bobby was alone with them. Day after day, in the place he should have felt safest, Bobby faced unimaginable things. The kind of stuff that makes your heart sink just thinking about it. He went through pain and fear that no kid should ever know. It's so hard to wrap your head around it, this young boy, just starting to find his way, to open up, suddenly trapped in a nightmare. His last month was a stark, harsh contrast to the laughter and learning of his school days. It's a reminder of how quickly things can change, and how some stories, as painful as they are, need to be told. With his hands, feet, and genitalia zapped by the electric fencing, Bobby's parents dragged him outside in his shorts and strapped him to a chair. He was beaten with belts, fists, and logs practically every day. With extreme severity, Bobby would penalize even the smallest imagined transgression, like glancing at Eddie inappropriately or causing excessive noise while eating. He was frequently forced to stand outside in freezing weather while nude. He learned to hide his tears because he knew that if he sobbed, things would just become worse. The ordeal Bobby faced is something that's hard to even speak about. There was this one time he was tied to a chair and beaten so badly with a log that he couldn't control his bowels. Then Eddie, in a disgusting act of humiliation, forced Bobby's own underwear onto his head and mouth, as if Bobby was less than human. Eddie's cruelty knew no bounds. He used a vacuum cleaner on Bobby's penis in such a brutal way that it caused bleeding, a type of abuse that's unimaginable in its callousness and pain. The torture didn't end there. Bobby's face was taped to a cushion that was soaked in urine, a degrading and cruel punishment. He was burned with candle wax, a kind of pain that's both physical and psychological. His meals were reduced to cat food, and he was forced to swallow alcohol through a funnel. It's heart-wrenching to hear that Bobby, in his unbearable pain, asked his own parents to end his life. It shows just how much he was suffering that he felt compelled to turn to the very people who should have been his safe haven, seeking an end to his agony. On a bitterly cold day, January 14th, 2006, something unthinkable happened to Bobby. He was taken outside and made to lie in the snow with no clothes on, right there in the harsh cold. Then Eddie, with a shovel in hand, began burying Bobby under the snow. Imagine the fear and confusion Bobby must have felt, the cold biting at his skin. Every time Bobby managed to push himself up, desperate to escape the freezing snow, he was pushed back down, the snow piling over him again. It must have been terrifying being buried alive like that. Then, a moment of hope, Bobby said he needed to pee. They let him up, but in his scared and frozen state, he couldn't. This only fueled Eddie and Nina's anger more. What happened next is hard to even say. Nina actually sat on top of him, while Eddie pushed his boot into Bobby's chest, a cruel and painful act. When they finally decided to go back inside, Bobby couldn't even walk. He was too weak, too cold, so they had to carry him. It's a chilling reminder of the cruelty that exists in the world. When they took Bobby back inside that day, they were trying to reverse the effects of the cold. They placed him in front of a fire, but he wasn't settling. He kept trying to get up. In a move that's hard to understand, Eddie responded by taping him to the chair. Just picture that, a young boy, already traumatized and freezing, now restrained, unable to move or find comfort. As the evening wore on, they moved Bobby to his bed. That bed should have been his refuge, a place for rest and recovery. Yet for Bobby, true safety and comfort had been out of reach for far too long. Later, when Eddie checked on him, he found something no parent ever wants to see. Bobby was unresponsive, no pulse, no signs of life. Nina's attempts at chest compressions were desperate, but they were futile. And in a moment that's difficult to fathom, they didn't call for an ambulance. The sad and stark reality is that Bobby didn't survive. He had choked to death on his own vomit. It's a hard, painful end to a life that had already seen so much suffering. After finding Bobby lifeless, they covered him with a blanket. To steady their nerves, Eddie and Nina had whiskey, and then, unbelievably, they just went to bed. It's hard to comprehend such a response in the face of such a tragedy. After deciding what to do with Bobby's body, they ultimately chose to dispose of it. They packed him into the trunk of their car and set out in search of a suitable location. Eventually, they settled on Lake Lovesjan, south of Jönköping. Bobby's body was wrapped in chains before being submerged in the icy waters of the lake. Eddie's reaction afterward is shocking and cruel. He raised a cheer, celebrating Bobby being gone. It's a moment that starkly highlights the brutality and heartlessness of his and Nina's actions. This end to Bobby's story is not just tragic, it's a stark reminder of the depths of cruelty that can exist, leaving us with a sense of profound loss and a lingering question about the value of life in the eyes of some. As the search for Äikiä intensified, soldiers from the Swedish armed forces joined in, showing just how serious things had become. Despite their best efforts, Bobby remained missing, raising doubts and pointing fingers at Nina and Eddie Larsson. Then, in February 2006, something shocking happened. Nina came forward to the authorities with a revelation. Bobby Äikiä's lifeless body was discovered under the frozen surface of Lake Lovesjan, finally putting an end to the agonizing search. It was a moment filled with tension and sadness as Nina and Eddie Larsson found themselves in handcuffs, facing the suspicion of everyone around them. And with this discovery, the truth of Bobby's tragic fate was finally revealed. In May 2006, the trial against Nina and Eddie Larsson kicked off at the Äikiä District Court. They both denied any role in Bobby's death, each blaming the other. As the trial progressed, disturbing details came to light: Eddie Larsson's inclination toward rough sex and his aggressive behavior towards Nina. Nina shared harrowing accounts, claiming she endured sexual abuse by Eddie Larsson and spoke of the perpetual fear they endured. It was a deeply troubling portrayal of their reality. On the other hand, Eddie Larsson insisted everything was consensual and denied harming Bobby in any way. The trial wrapped up with a heavy verdict. Nina and Eddie Larson were convicted of murder, assault, and negligence leading to death. In June 2006, they received a 10-year prison sentence. It marked the end of a troubling legal saga, uncovering the dark secrets behind Bobby's tragic end. Äikiä's tragic death stirred widespread media coverage and evoked strong reactions from the public. The Swedish tabloid newspaper Expressen spearheaded a touching gesture by collecting 30,000 roses from the community, which were then presented at Äikiä's funeral held in Ödsmåls Church, north of Stenungsund, Västra Götaland County. His final resting place was Norm Church, where the doors were open for the public to pay their respects. In response to this heartbreaking incident, the Swedish parliament enacted a law in 2008 outlining procedures for investigating suspected child abuse involving children with special needs, a significant step towards protecting vulnerable children in similar situations. Tragically, in February 2008, Nina found herself victimized once again when she was attacked and suffered facial injuries while in prison, leading to her receiving compensation of 54,000 kroner. Then, in January 2017, another sorrowful chapter unfolded as Nina gave birth to a child who was promptly taken into foster care by authorities, deeming Nina unfit to care for the infant. As we conclude Bobby Äikiä's story, we're left with heavy hearts, contemplating the immense challenges he faced and the heartbreaking betrayal by those who should have protected him. His life serves as a poignant reminder of the importance of empathy, understanding, and vigilance in safeguarding the most vulnerable. Join us on our journey as we explore other documentaries, shedding light on important stories that need to be heard. Let's advocate for justice and strive to create a world where such tragedies are never repeated. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to meeting you again in our future documentaries.